Hello everyone and welcome back to CountrySlide. Now this is going to be a slightly different episode to normal because this is being released on Friday the 7th of March. Tomorrow, Saturday 8th of March, is International Women's Day. So we decided, as three men that host Britain's premier rural podcast, that maybe we should find some girlies to take over for us. So we found three women and we asked them to put aside their lace making and stop thinking about kittens for at least 5 minutes to be able to talk to me about life in the British countryside as women. I'm here to ask questions, but you're not going to hear that much from me, and that's probably for the best. So now I'm going to hand you over to producer Amy, Angharad, and Claire.
So I thought we could start by doing a little bit about what we all do and a bit about our past and why perhaps Richard Negus decided that we should be on the podcast. So I didn't grow up in a very rural setting. I grew up kind of between Manchester and the Peak District on the urban rural fringe edge thing. But I never liked going into the city. I was always more wanting to be out in the farmland and footpaths and things that were nearby, and grew up and went to study wildlife conservation and worked for a few different charities, did some voluntary work, basically everything that I could do to stay outside and to help nature rather than people in a weird way. And then I moved to work with Richard doing foraging courses, and I've basically ended up living in the depths of rural North Wales at various different points. So where I am now, we don't get snowed in every winter, but at one point that was certainly my life of kind of a week snowed in the house and not being able to do anything, losing power, losing water. It's all good fun. And I think that Negus basically said that I should be on the podcast because he has to listen to me talking and messaging and things the rest of the time. So this is his way of getting me back, perhaps. No, don't quite know. Or rather, it was just, she's female, so she can go on this one. It's all good. She can talk for this one, rather than just seeing me angrily typing in the chat saying, "You've been talking for too long," which is often the way it goes. So that's a little bit about me. How about Angharad? What's your background?
Yes, so I grew up in Suffolk on our family farm. It's a mixed farm and everything grown on the farm goes through the farm shop. So I would say I had a childhood of visiting every farm shop in the country.
Oh, nice.
I'm well toured on farm shops and yeah, so that was me as a younger child growing up. And then I went on to train as a nurse, and that's my profession as such, is I'm a children's nurse, and went on to do my health visitor training after that. But in the middle of all that, I found Young Farmers, and I think that was a real turning point for me. So glad to have stumbled across the group, because that was where I found lots of people that I say were maybe my tribe, that got that rural living as a younger teenager, and we had lots of fun, barn parties, young farmers rallies, that sort of thing. I guess that's where I've ended up now with the volunteering that I do in my life. So I am the director of the Hadleigh Show this year, and that has followed on from, as I said, the young farmers aspect of things. You hand over the baton, and the outgoing director, George, was somebody that I'd maybe worked alongside, if that's the right term, within, or volunteered alongside in Young Farmers, became acquainted with. So that's how I've ended up with that role, which keeps me very busy. As I said, it's a volunteer role, so lots of time and hours given from, not just me, but a huge team of people around me, and mostly male dominated. So coming in as a female is quite new to a lot of people, but yeah, I guess that's me and what's keeping me busy at the moment.
That's really interesting. It must take a lot of hours to organise a show as well, and to be the show director. Like, that is dedication. Really.
Yes, definitely. I'd say the emails are constantly pinging at the moment, really ramped up. The show's in May, so over the last, I'd say, since this side of the new year, there's been lots more coming through, lots of questions, lots of policies to review, and all those finer details that you don't even think about on show day, but equally wealth of other volunteers on hand that all do their little bit to bring these things together.
Great. How about you, Claire?
Hello. So yeah, I'm Claire, the other half of Mr. Negus. So I grew up in rural North Yorkshire. Had a love of art and design when I was at school, and went off into a career in that direction. I started off working after going to college and all of that. Went to work in tea and coffee at the home of the famous Yorkshire tea, Taylors of Harrogate, up in Harrogate. But then moved on about 3 years after that first job into the hard stuff, went to work in whiskey, and moved up to Scotland and worked for about 10 years for Glenmorangie whiskey, and stayed there for quite a while, and then moved on to work with another drinks company, Diageo, a bigger beast, and worked with them on their luxury brands and Johnnie Walker whiskey. So that sort of took me for quite a lot of my working life, and then I actually decided to leave the company. We at that point moved back to Suffolk. I'd met Richard, we'd had our son Charlie, and had a consultancy role for a bit, and then decided I wanted to get back to getting my hands dirty again and going back. I'd become very strategic in the jobs I was doing and not really, it wasn't doing it for me anymore. So decided to get my hands dirty, and I decided to learn pottery. I'd always loved the 3D form. I worked on, like I say, luxury brands and the beautiful bottles that they do in whiskey. And I thought, well, I want to make some nice physical things. So I found a lovely chap in a small town nearby who taught me pottery. And then I am sort of pretty much self-taught myself the rest along the way. I've got a kiln and a wheel in a studio in the garden. And I now make a range of pottery, all inspired by nature and the hedgerows. And I go around little fairs selling it to the lovely people of Suffolk. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
It's fantastic pottery as well. Rather, I've admire every picture that goes on Instagram that you put up.
You. Thank you.
And I love seeing the befores and after of the glazing process before it goes in the kiln, and the colours and how kind of drab some of them are, and then once they've been fired, the glaze just comes to life, doesn't it?
It's very different, very, very different. You don't really know what you're going to get. You can either open it up and go, wow, that's lovely, that's just what I thought I'd get, or you go, ugh, sort of close it, and you don't want anyone to see. You're almost embarrassed that it's not come out how you'd like it to come out, and you feel quite upset, actually. It's about you spent quite a lot of time putting yourself into something, and it's just really not come out how you'd expect it to. But live and learn.
Okay, so intro's done. I didn't learn anything about you there, Amy. Well, sort of, maybe. I'm trying to work out which way to ask these questions because... Well, no, because I'm going to start with some... I don't want to presume anything here, so I think I'm going to start with that. What, as women working in the countryside, what would be something that you think I wouldn't know about, that I wouldn't consider as a chap? So something that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of as, not necessarily a challenge, not necessarily a hardship, but just something I hadn't considered.
That is a tricky one. So one of the things that I have found from the word go, because my first job was as a countryside ranger, and I was outside every single day in all weathers, working, doing physical work, digging holes, planting things, putting in way markers, doing footpath checks, all sorts of things. Clothing was one of my biggest issues, which isn't something that is kind of unknown. It is quite out there in the world, but a lot of women's outdoor clothing is substandard to men's outdoor clothing unless you pay a premium price. So you can get a pair of men's trousers that cost 20 quid and they're pretty rough, tough, can withstand things, and they fit men fine. Whereas to try and get something of equivalent in women's stuff tends to be more pricey. And it might sound a little bit of a weird gripe, but yeah, that was something.
So there aren't the equivalent of the sort of 10 quid, 20 quid flexithanes for women, or everything sort of square cut for men's
Yeah, I was
arses?
going to say, generally they're just not the right fit. There was somebody I followed on Instagram, I've forgotten who it was, but she's a shepherd, and she was trying to get dungarees, basically, but the waterproof dungarees that you wear for, lambing and all that kind of thing, but ones that actually fit and were comfortable and she could bend and things in, and men's just aren't designed for hips and bums, basically. It's like they don't have that curve in them. And she was trying all, and the crotches were at weird heights if you got the right waist size, and the crotch was, down too low. It was just weird. And it is real. It's true. It used to be a thing in mountaineering gear as well, but I think that caught up more. Whereas I think like practical outdoor wear for women is still a bit behind. Has anybody else found that, or is that just me? Do I just have a weird body shape?
You just don't really have those sorts of you don't have those shops. If you're pretty rural, there's not really those sorts of shops. And not only for work, very much like there's a couple of places near us that do work where it's very much geared more towards men. I wouldn't go there thinking I'd ever get really anything for myself. So there is a sort of a lack of actual for women who like, you do. So I'm not saying I'm somebody who does particularly like to go shopping, but just places to go, really. And that probably sort of leads on to just that kind of interaction that women like. It's a bit more difficult, I would say, in the countryside. You're sort of spread out. That engagement that's really quite nice. If you've got small children, a lifesaver sometimes to have other women around. There's not necessarily. When I had Charlie, I was actually just on the outskirts of Newmarket, which there was a lot more going on. There was I could go and do buggy boot camp, and I could go and do, pregnancy yoga, which was just within a few miles. Whereas now I'm a lot more rural, and I really don't. There's not those things without traveling probably about 10 miles to go to something like that. So I think that interaction with other women, which you need really if you're just around.
Yeah, you do.
An additional question to that then is that as well, sometimes it's like age appropriate women, because I'm just trying to think of our village here where the average age I think is over 65.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, thinking, Claire, about what you've just said about having a young family, those times where I live very rurally, and it might just be that, like you say, Richard, it's you don't have maybe younger mums around you. It's older people, which are all very lovely, and it's nice to have an interaction and appear in the buggy and things at that time. But actually having people on the ground that you're familiar with, you've got connections with and things in common, is much more few and far between when living and working rurally.
Yeah, because you have children as well. I don't have children, I just have dogs because at the moment.
Oh, it's something to tell us.
No, not
too
that
busy.
I'm aware of. But yeah, we're not too far away from the local town, but if I had a young child and I didn't have transport, then it would be very difficult because there isn't really anything in the local village. There's a little community centre, but there's nothing to do with, no mum groups or anything there. There's some fitness things and cricket and football, but nothing for socialising as a younger woman, or even a woman who's a bit older like me. Can't think of anything. It's like the pub is probably the only place where you can go and socialise. You don't want to be there every single night, you know?
Well, you can take children to a pub. I mean, I'm an example of that. I think there's a great photo of me immediately after my christening, sort of laid out flat on a pub sofa, chair thing somewhere. It's a very 80s photo. The age-appropriate thing struck me there, because that might be a particularly rural thing, because we have an ageing demographic in the UK anyway. And I haven't got the figures in front of me, but I'd be willing to bet at least £5 that skews towards rural areas. Just due to demographics, average price of a house, all of these things. It's retiring to a rural area, or you don't retire to a inner city area. So it might skew for the fewer younger people that are there. They become increasingly isolated, and as you say, with young kids, if you're the mum on her own at home, or just you're dealing with a different issue to what the dad is. So it's finding people of relatable age, or relatable, I don't want to say demographic again, I've said it twice, something better, a better word than that.
It is, because I think as is probably more the norm, and I may be saying something that's sort of like a bit outdated, I would say the majority of the time the men are still going out to do the work, and the women, they are. Even if the women go back to their job for those initial months, it's natural that the woman would be the one at home. So you're not getting that interaction. You're not, you're missing out on. With all due respect to the men, they go out and life continues. They get that social interaction. They get that break, and the time when you need it the most at home, it's. You're not getting that from a job, and you're also the added thing of there's not that many people instantly on hand of your age to sort of, my baby's doing this. What's yours doing? It's driving me mad. I don't know how to deal with it. I actually can't cope. And it's tough. Like I say, when I had my little one, I was more in a small town, and there was it was great to have people close by. I think it must be quite tough actually if you're. And I guess like not a lot of people choose to move to a place where there's not that much there. That's why they're not there. But if you grow up in a community like perhaps farming, you just got to get on with it.
I think that's quite a lot of the mentality with, I'd say, young children living rurally. Like you say, you just crack on, don't you? And in my previous role, as I said, as a health visitor, that's supporting families in the community with babies, young children. I absolutely saw rural isolation with mums and women and young families. Sometimes you say rural isolation and you think maybe the older generation that don't get out and about as much, but it's very much just as real with women, particularly with young families, like you say, struggling to get out. If I hadn't have had my car, I would have been very isolated, and it's pushing yourself to go out and do those things. Equally, those WhatsApp groups were a lifeline, and those connections, like you said, Claire, just to be able to ping a message and say, anyone else been up all night? Those sorts of things were really, really useful, and much more of a reliance on that.
Have you seen the way working lives for women, roles for women, perceptions of women in a rural space, but not necessarily rural work? Have you seen that change in your lifetimes?
I would say yes. I would say I myself am really keen that my husband does a lot more of the share of things that maybe has been the traditional share at home, but I know that's part of me, and maybe my childhood, as say, seeing my parents create the farm shop and everything like that. I absolutely saw my mum doing a huge amount of work, so maybe that's where my drive and passion for those equal opportunities comes from. And equally, the load is hard, so I do want to offload some of that. I'm working as well, so we have to share this out, but I think it has to go that way in order to allow women to go forward and show that we can be good leaders, and we can do these things. It just has to be the right balance and the right support networks around you to achieve that.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think it's a real what I found, and it might not just be even being in the countryside, but as you want to have a family, and I think it's many people do, women want to do that, but they want to keep a job as well. You feel, I know I felt an incredible amount of trying to get that balance right, and I had to be away from home a lot when Charlie was younger to keep my job that was the one that sort of paid the mortgage, really, and feeling like I wasn't doing anything well. I wasn't doing the job well. Felt like I wasn't being a good mom. People would tell me, "No, you're great. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine." But I felt myself I wasn't doing anything well. And it's really tough, because if you do, which I did, say, okay, and my son was about 8, that's it, I'm actually going to take a pull. I'm going to focus on my son. I think then when you're based more rurally, there's less opportunity to do something. So sort of in the field I was, it was hard to get, which was quite specialised in the world of design, but at quite a senior level. I wasn't able to get that anywhere without having to still perhaps go into London or something. And I think it's difficult. I've got no complaints. I love living in the countryside. It suits me. But you almost have to accept that there's not the opportunities to do, and therefore you've got to really work on, well, what else can I do? And even then, there's not much opportunity for jobs if you're having to make a bit of a change, and still wanting something quite challenging. So I think that's difficult for women who want to, after children, and live in the countryside, to do, to go back into the world of work, which they find challenging. And I do the pottery, which is great. I still, if I'm honest, feel I'd like to do something else, and still on that search for what that is.
A lot of people, a lot of women particularly, seem to take a self-employed route after they have children, because it gives you those more flexible hours. I know my mum, when I was growing up, she gave up work when she had my older brother, and then it was only when I was in primary school that she went back into work, but it was part-time. It was just kind of one morning and an afternoon a week, and it would fit around our school hours, so that she was always there to take us to school and to pick us up from school. And she was really careful with that, because my dad was working. He was away from home from kind of 7 a.m. till 6 p.m, because he worked in Manchester and he had to get there. So whereas rural is different, because if you're commuting from a rural area to go into a job anywhere, then it's generally going to take you over an hour to get there. And if you've got children and childcare to think of, and less I don't know whether the schools have as many after school clubs and things like that for looking after the children that little bit more, so that you can get there to collect them later. I mean, around here, there's a lot of the private hire vehicles act as taxis to take children to schools from the farms and things. They do pickups at the end of the lane, and it's just very, very different. But that self-employed route, I suppose, gives you a bit more flexibility, and I can see the attraction in going down that, or having a business that you run from home in some way, whether that's a farm shop that you set up so that you're literally there all the time, but also your children can be playing in the back garden and you know where they are, you can look after them. Having that as a bit. But yeah, women in the rural spaces and how it's changed. As I said, I've only really been living in a rural place for how long has it been now? 15 years. And it depends on the situation that I'm in. So I know I go into a lot of the local agricultural stores and things. If I go in on my own, then it's fine. I look for what I want. I ask for what I want, and it's all fine. But if I go in with Richard, I go invisible. It's like I put a cloak on and nobody sees me and they just talk to Richard. It's hilarious. Absolutely hilarious.
Even when we've come in to do something that's for you, even when we've come, I'm just tagging along in the background. They'll turn away from you and start talking to me.
Yeah, I'll ask a question and then they'll look at Richard like, can I speak to her? Is that okay?
Is that because of his celebrity status, though?
Oh, well, maybe. But do you get this with your Richard as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah. The crowd's part, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Suddenly you're just shoved to one side and, discarded.
A tough world of fame.
Yeah. Really is. Really is. At least he might throw you a free drink or something to help you. I don't know. Does he do that?
No. Just take it all. Take it all.
It's terrible. Terrible.
This next question, I'm going to try and sort of frame out, because otherwise I might come off. It won't paint me in a good light. Let's say that.
I can't open the door and hit you, You're only in the next room.
I was going to say, it looks like, talking about the difference between men and women, it's like Richard's got this lovely kitchen setting from what I can see, and it looks like you're in the larder. You've been shoved out by by the spare fridge or something.
Yeah. No, so I'm actually on Richard's computer because he's got the good microphone set up, whereas he's out in the kitchen where I normally am when we record the podcast, on the laptop with the little headset instead.
Looking after the dogs.
Yes, looking after the dogs, so I don't have as many distractions and I can focus on talking, which is nice.
Yeah. So Amy and I, we've spoken about this thing a few times, so it's not just my idea, listeners. Don't lynch me. Is there a possibility that, even with the changing perceptions of women in countryside roles, and maybe there's been an improvement in some areas, maybe, and probably not in a lot of areas, or not enough improvement, is there a possibility that a continual reinforcement of putting, women in business, women in rural business, women in the countryside, women in this, women first, on every single thing, may actually be creating a narrative of it being harder for women in the countryside than it might actually be, or at least it being a more combative, less friendly space than the reality would suggest. So before you throw things at me, this wasn't my idea. This was Amy's idea based on a conversation. We were talking about this. I think it was at the last game fair.
It was, yeah.
And it was after we walked past the 17th Women in Field Sports event, we thought, it does seem to be the same women again and again, the same 12 women again and again doing women in field sports things. But also, if you were a woman coming to this for the first time, it would look like it was a horrible place for a woman to be, because you have so many support groups around there that are encouraging people to do it. So that's my very prickly question. I'm going to hand it over to Amy, and I'm going to turn my microphone off.
Thank you, Richard. So do you... I find it's a weird concept for me to explain, hence Richard explained it actually better than I tend to do. Does it make sense? And what are your thoughts on this?
It does to me, and I do get it. I think maybe for men coming in and seeing women, like you say, women's sports, this one, and this group for these women, it may be that men step back and say, why do they need that? But actually, I think when you look back in history of how far women have come and what we've had to overcome with some of those rights, the ability to even go to work, the ability to take part in some of those sports is massive when you look back in history of, as I said, how far you've come with that. So I think it's a real balance, but equally there's still so much learning to do, because women, there still is, like Claire said about working and a family, that sometimes is talked about as sort of the motherhood penalty, and having to give things up to allow for other aspects to develop is really tricky. So it is a fine balance, and I do get that. Is there too much of supporting women to do this? But equally, I think when you really live through some of those challenges and those setbacks, that's the only way you can really understand how challenging some of this is. And to put a career on hold and things like that is huge. Something that you've worked really hard for and really want to achieve. So sometimes, what I've done is pause, my nursing career in able to look after my family and get that balance, and thinking about actually what impact does that have. Yes, I'm, thriving. I get to do lots of different pickups and be more present, but there's so much more to give still. And to go to a group that really understands you and gets you, and you can go off and do your women's sports and come together and have that unity is really valuable. I'd say watch the space when you get a bunch of women together. Some good things can happen. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's true. The support that those groups can give is fantastic, and I love that they exist for that, and that because there are a lot of women out. Well, I say this. There's a lot of people out there in the world who might feel like certain spaces are difficult for them to break into, or like they might not be welcome there because they have preconceptions about it. And so having a group that they can go to learn that actually this world isn't a scary place, and that actually the people who are part of it can be really friendly. Because a lot of the women's groups that I see, they still go, and for example, there's one that I'm on the fringes of, and they go deer stalking, and there's lots of opportunities that are offered at a slightly discounted rate, or just opportunities that are put out there and advertised for women to go deer stalking, but they're often with men who are leading it. And so it's a way in to almost learn that it's not a scary place, and that the men in this world are just as welcoming as the women, because they usually are. Not to alienate anybody, but women can be really bitchy. It can almost be worse being in an entirely female surround at times, because they can be very catty, and being with a bunch of blokes who aren't really bothered about anything, aren't bothered about what gender you are, aren't bothered about your ability, as long as you are there with good intentions. Rather than, I've found in the past personally that women can be constantly trying to one-up each other, and it can just get a bit exhausting. And with these groups, there's also some of the energy that they put out to the outside world can almost be, this is a really, really hard thing to do. And I can't help thinking that if I was younger and trying to get where I am now, that I might be put off by that. I might think, well, they're making it look really hard, and if this is necessary to be in that world, then you know what, I'm just going to find something else to do, because I don't feel like I fit in their mold. I don't feel like I look like I should do. I don't feel like I have the right attitude. I don't feel like I would be welcomed there because of who I am and just as a human being. And that could be a bit off-putting. I'm not saying they're all the same, because they're not, but that's just kind of my perception of it, and that's my opinion, my thoughts on some of these women groups and some of the women who pitch themselves as being breaking barriers and breaking boundaries and all these kind of things. And it's like, yeah, we do need to do that, and that is something that's historically has been incredibly important, and it's something it's amazing that women are where they are now in general, and that they've reached the levels, and that we have senior women in all sorts of fields, from agriculture, from gamekeeping, all of these different things that have historically been very male dominated. We've got a much more level mix now, but I feel like the narrative that's being put out by some of these women's groups is this is a really hard world to exist in, and if you want to exist in it, you have to be like us. And I think that that's the damaging part of it, possibly. Yeah. That's me off my soapbox now.
I think it's finding what works for you as well. Like you say, some of these groups work for you, others don't. And when you find something that you can work together and gel in, then that's, as I said, that can be really, really powerful. But equally, yeah, there may be some where it does put up more barriers than is maybe necessarily needed.
Is that a thing that's worth highlighting then, that it is, when you say this is a women's group, women in whatever rural thing, for the sake of our podcast, they're not all equal. They're not all the same. Some are women working in a certain profession within that thing. Some are support groups for women. Some are effectively marketing groups for women. But if you just say this is a women's group, on the outside, particularly to a chap, it all looks like the same thing. But on the other side of that, it's very different groups performing very different roles. Am I closer to the mark with that?
I think so. I think you are, yeah. Because like I said, it's not, you can't have a one size fits all for that. They are all very different.
Claire, is this something you've come across at all?
Oh, I was just feeling a little bit outside of almost looking in, because actually I'm not somebody who gets actively involved. So Richard goes shooting, I don't go shooting. It's not something I'm interested in doing. I like cooking what he brings home, but I don't actively go out shooting. I'm not really, I suppose, into the sort of rural pursuits type area, but I do go along to the pub afterwards or things like that, and made to feel very welcome. It's never that feeling of sort of, oh, this is a male only domain, and there's very much women there involved and taking part. And I think particularly probably more so in the countryside than other areas where it's historically been physical, hard graft work that the men would have done. I can see real changes happening in that as things have developed in the countryside and the roles have developed and their diversification. And they see the great value in the entrepreneurial brain and coping of women, their skills they have that can do many different things. So I think that's great, because it's really sort of, we're in it together. It's men and women together. That is the development I see in the countryside, which is great. I'm never really one for sort of. I absolutely, don't get me wrong, think it's fantastic that women can. I've had that in my career. I've never been stopped to do where I want to get to, and have been pushed and promoted, and that's fantastic, and I'm very grateful for that. And it's great that things are moved on, but I don't think we should be doing things for the sake of doing it as well. If there's certain roles that people, it's who's the right person for the job. And I feel today that we do embrace women's skills well. And I suppose, like I said, I'm a little bit outside looking in. I think Angharad working in farming is probably actually in it and maybe of more experience to say what it's really like.
Yeah, and I think coming into, as I said, my role within the Hadleigh Show is very much like, Claire, what you've just sort of said, in that there's, yes, I'm in the minority in some respects, but equally there are a good team of females there. And sometimes I think maybe men don't always know how to interact with women in these sorts of situations. Yeah. Men are often, heavy banter and know what they can say, what's funny. And when a female steps in, it changes that dynamic and can sometimes make people feel a bit more awkward, maybe about not sure if they can have that banter or not. So I think maybe there's some sort of reservations there, but once people maybe get to know you, what I found is once you can just relax around those people, then it becomes quite a well balanced and equal workforce, and that with some good sort of values and respect for the genders there, but I think there is an element of men not knowing how to maybe, as say, manage or have those conversations or have banter with women, and do that comfortably.
It's quite sweet, really, in a way, because oftentimes they err on the side of their. It's almost like they've been told at some point in their life that they shouldn't swear around women. They should treat them. They should almost treat them like their sister, but like they would treat their sister when their parents are looking. So nicely, basically. Because the amount of times that I've been around like Richard and other blokes at the same time, and I've walked over their mid-conversation and suddenly they're like, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said that word, and sorry about my language. And I'm like, you haven't heard me on a bad day, It's absolutely fine. It's just words. And yeah, but you have to reach that balance. I think there's a little bit of extra effort, do you reckon, that's required just to make sure that they know what's okay? Do you find that? Is that
Yeah, I think there is. Yeah, that extra effort to know those boundaries and to know you so that they can relax around you and have a joke and comfortably have a joke, knowing that, they're not going to offend. Like you say, might seem quite sweet, but sometimes that's hard work in itself. Just relax, just be yourself. I have heard these words before and
yeah.
I can take a joke, sort of thing.
You almost feel like you have to go after them first. To be like, you have to, say something to them.
Yes.
Do a bit of banter, and then they'll get it and be like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm okay. I can say that back. But,
no, completely agree with that. Yeah.
So last August, there was an article in the Farmers Weekly by Abby Kay, which was titled something like, "Is there a problem with young farmers' culture?" And it was relating to, if you're familiar with young farmers, you'll have seen the hoodies with the slogans on the back, or the T-shirts, as it was in my day, and often misspelled, particularly for our club. But the overall thrust of the article was that there is sort of a hidden subculture of sexual harassment and inappropriate behaviour and generally male-oriented behaviour in young farmers' clubs, despite the fact the National Federation of Young Farmers Clubs says it's open to everyone ages, I think 10 to 28 or 25 or something is the upper limit for young farmers. So it's quite an age range there. But the drinking culture and the partying culture does seem to be firmly embedded in there, and whether that's something that's changed or got worse. So the question I have is, if you were to go back to your 14, 15-year-old selves now, what advice would you give them for everything over the next, say, 20 years that followed?
That's a big question.
That's a big question. But it's like something that your 14 or 15-year-old self would understand and that's appropriate for this podcast.
That's appropriate.
Thinking about what you've just said about young farmers and the press that got last summer, I would actually be going back to that younger self and saying, join sooner. I had a brilliant time, with young farmers, and I'm so grateful I didn't experience anything what was said in the media that other people had experienced. Yes, we had fun, there was banter, we, like you say, we'd had parties and things, but I felt, looking back now, I still think maybe actually it's a safer way to party than hearing about what happens sometimes out, in towns, things with spiking on the streets. Actually, it felt a very safe group of friends, possibly because, as well, I guess parents probably knew one another, so there was a bit of knowing who you're out with. So to me, I would say embrace that sooner, but equally that's because I know I found such a great group of friends within that, that's my take on it.
That's nice. Yeah, I didn't get into drinking until after I'd left university, I was in my mid-20s when I discovered an alcohol that I actually liked the flavour of. So my friends in high school were going out underage drinking and college and things, but I was never part of that culture. But it sounded horrific. So some of the stories that they came back with, and also just the acceptance that somebody had spiked their drink with something that made them get more drunk. Nothing absolutely terrible ever happened to anybody I knew, but people adding extra alcohol to drinks certainly did, and making them get drunk quicker, and just giving them alcoholic drinks when actually they just wanted water. That kind of thing definitely happened and is still terrible. And it's just not, I never wanted to be part of that group, which kind of alienated me, really. And maybe what I'd say to my younger self is that's actually okay. But you're going to have to put a lot of work in to get where you want to go.
And
really.
then one day you'll discover gin and everything will go wrong.
Yeah, that was basically it. yeah, I did discover gin. But yeah, I'm kind of glad that I didn't go down that underage drinking route, because it really never appealed. Even once I was at university and everybody was going out, it's like, I'll just stay sober. I'll just be the one who can get everybody else home and be safe, and that'll be grand with me. So yeah.
Oh, so yeah, my young self, I feel really, really fortunate to have grown up when I did back in the day. I was, I could give my age away. So I was in the 80s. That's when I was a teenager. Life seemed simple. And I know probably saying what a lot of people say out there at the moment, but it really did. There wasn't the pressure. It didn't feel like. There wasn't the... I'm sure it was around, but there didn't seem to be this anxiety, maybe relating to tech and things that they say now, but there was none of that anxiety, it felt. I'm sure some people suffered perhaps with that, but there wasn't, that didn't seem to be a thing that was talked about then as a young person growing up. I had a balance of sort of growing up in the countryside, but also I went to school in the centre of York and had a great school life. Enjoy my school life. Had friends. When you say I was wincing when you say you didn't touch alcohol till after your uni days. It was like sort of I had a little bit of misspent youth in the York Museum gardens and cider.
I was a weirdo though. That was the thing.
Sort of like putting the polos in the mouth as you get into the car with your mum and thinking that she knew. I thought I was being brilliant. Wind the window down, stick the polos in. She'll never know. But yeah, I and it's funny now because I've got a 14-year-old son, and I almost now am a little bit sort of, watch out for this, don't do that. And I think, God, if I was really honest to him, I did all the things I'm saying don't you do, and I've turned out all right. And actually, I heard from someone say the other day that actually being honest with them to say, I've made many mistakes along the way, but you learn from them. I do think that is how you learn. And I think sort of the advice, I think I need to be less afraid with my son of letting go and letting him learn. But he's like me, so he'll be an absolute bugger. So I'm quite worried of letting go completely, but he's got to learn, and I'm sure he'll do grand. I feel, enough confidence that he's got us around him and people around him that are keeping those rails for him as he makes his way along through life. But sorry, I've probably gone a bit off patch with the original question, but
the world is very different now. Like even from when I was a kid, I was thinking this the other day, that when I was up to the age, well, just when I was a kid, I used to just take my bike out, and I had friends who lived just down the road, and I'd just say, I'm going to go and play with Amy, because I had a friend who was called Amy as well, or Johnny or Alex or something. I'd be like, I'm just going to go and knock on their door, see if they're free, and ride my bike around, or go around the corner to the playground and we'll be in there. But that was it. No mobile phones or anything, which is, I'm guessing, the same as both of you as well. And anything could have happened. You'd be out for hours, and literally all that your mum knew was you're in this particular place, and there's no guarantee that you're going to stay there either, because you're a kid. And I don't think I would ever let my child do that now. Not in, possibly more so in a rural area, but not in a town or... Yeah.
I think that's an advantage of, I say now with Charlie, I probably, if we lived, I'm more inclined living where we live, and it is quite rural, but I'm more inclined to let him, he goes off with his pals. They go off fishing, they go off on adventures, they're in the fields. He's enjoying some of the freedoms like I did when I'm younger, but I think there's a lot of people wouldn't be happy with their children doing that, and actually being somewhere where pretty much there's only 400 people in our village. Most of them know who Charlie is, my son. So there's that sort of watchful eye around, and to keep an eye out for things. It is still a bit of a leap of faith, because you think, well, what if a stranger comes along? And I want him to be able to go out. I want him to experience that childhood of having adventures and doing things like that. Don't want him to be stuck inside. I think for him, he is naturally, because of probably growing up with us and his dad, he wants to be out and about. He's got that in him. The flip side is that if you're pretty rural, you can, and you're not close to your friends, you could become more insular as well and stay in your room and play on your games. So it depends, I suppose, on the character of the child.
Because are you more rural than Angharad with your...
Yeah, we're fairly rural, but yeah, it just made me think there back to my childhood, and like you say, going off on adventures with siblings around fields for a whole day, whole afternoon. It was really fun. Pack up a picnic. I remember one day my dad had to come out looking for us because he didn't know where we'd gone, and we were simply just making a den in a field and like having some quite innocent sort of fun. And it did make me think, sometimes growing up rurally, you're a bit more sheltered, and coming out to the real world maybe hits that little bit harder. And that's maybe where some of those concerns are with sort of teenage years and things, is that you hope that you've given your child all the tools that they need to live safely and well and all of this. But living rurally, it is just a different way of life, and there's different challenges. Thinking of things like the dangers, for me, I'm thinking about ponds and those sorts of things, living rurally and knowing what to do, thinking about not going into cattle fields, those sorts of challenges, as opposed to what children are growing up with living in urban areas. It's just a really different lifestyle growing up in the countryside.
And particularly as women in urban areas, that can be very dangerous, and understanding how to kind of read the environment that you're in and how to, I suppose, have that spidey sense going of I'm not comfortable doing this walk, and what can you do to, say you're walking home from a train station or something and it's starting to go dark because it's winter and it's dark at 6 or something, but you can feel that little bit more vulnerable. Whereas in a rural area, if you were walking back from a bus stop, if you've still got bus stops, because a lot of them have gone, haven't they? But if you're walking back from that environment, you probably feel a lot more safe, because it's also quieter. You can hear what's going on around you. You, like you said, most of the people in the village, if not all of them. Whereas if you're in a town or something, don't know everybody. You never do. And that awareness is something that you've got to learn, and maybe you pick that up more if you've grown up in an urban area. You're more aware of your vulnerabilities as a woman. that's something I hadn't thought of before. But yeah,
I was about to say that. Yeah,
Yeah.
is there a urban versus rural as well? I mean, in terms of things like policy and social norms and the way cultures swing and things like that, do you think maybe women in rural areas get more forgotten, or like everything skews towards women in urban areas in terms of how the world is built, whether that's through just life as a woman, or parenting, or access to services? I don't know. I mean, this is all stuff I again don't know because I'm a chap.
I think in general, I mean, we're verging onto the going into the political side of things, but I don't think there is as much focus put on. There's just not. And, the small schools, the little village primaries, as quaint as they may look from the outside, they quite quickly start to burst at the seams, and don't get the same level per head funding. So I do think there's a number of things where there's just not we're a little bit forgotten. I think at the same time, I'm trying not to sound complaining about it, because I love the fact that we are where we are with what we have around it, and I feel so grateful and so lucky for that. But at the same time, I do feel it's a sort of a bit forgotten, and even though we still contribute to society and work in society and pay our taxes and everything, it seems to be that we're lower down on the list.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I was thinking, our closest primary school is not where we send our children because they don't have the facilities. So I am one of the dreaded mums that drives an SUV and parks up outside of school to drive somewhere with better facilities that we needed. So, like you say, there's still a way to go for really strengthening support and opportunities for those sort of living rurally.
You said about the rural schools. The policy here in North Wales is, if it's a rural school, close it, sell the land to build houses on, and then open a larger school in the local town that soon fills up because you've built houses on where there used to be a school, and now that's full and you still can't get your kid into the right school. So it's a good policy that's working well. They seem to be on the right trajectory with it.
It's great.
So we've been talking a lot about the women's folk for this episode, which I think was my brief given to me by a drunken hedge layer somewhere. The final question then is, what is an issue sort of affecting life in the countryside that might be overlooked and might almost be seen as something affecting women, or a women's issue, or it's probably not the term I should use.
No, not really.
that is actually it's actually something for both genders. Because I'm thinking of conversations we've had offline already with Clare and Angharad about different work they do. Is there anything that is there's an issue that affects both genders, but maybe seen as being skewed to being a women's problem?
So I'll let Angharad talk a bit as well about something, but my particular thing, I think, is because I now am self-employed in a company of one, just being me, and I've chosen to design and make my own pottery, which to some would be an idyllic lifestyle. I'm able to do it from home. I do it out in the garden, and it is great, and I'm very fortunate, and it's a creative job, feeds my creativity, and I contribute to the household pot with it as well. But it's something that I think, particularly in a rural location, I've got to be really watchful of the isolation that brings with that. I sort of found myself last year sort of retreating into myself a little bit too much, and aware of not feeling on top form. So I actually sort of thought I need a bit more social interaction. So I actually took a little job in a cafe up the road, and became aware that, there's quite a few people who are feeling that through lack of, probably, I suppose, social interaction, particularly the older people who might have lost a partner And this little cafe that I went and worked in I called it sort of like my, it's a community cafe. I felt really quite good about working there. It wasn't just a job. It actually felt more than that, because it was actually a lifeline for many people to go to places like that. And I think it's something that we need to be quite guarded of as times become hard and things become hard for businesses. The recent things that have been brought in, for small businesses, that you lose that, and it's a lifeline for many people, because there's not many of those sorts of places in a community. There's just this little one cafe serving a radius of probably 10 miles or more. I think that is quite a thing to keep an eye out. I mean, you hear about sort of for the farming community, the sort of, the mental health side of things. Again, it's quite for many of the farmers, whilst again, people may look at it from the outside and think they're living and, they're working in the countryside. It's quite an isolative job a lot of the time. We're all only human at the end of the day.
I've known many an old farmer as well who would go to town every single day to the shops and to buy a sandwich in a cafe, because they lived on their own and that was their only chance to have human interaction, really. Particularly now with a lot fewer farm workers. A lot of farms, they don't have many people there. They might work in shifts and there's only one person or two people there at a time. So being able to go to different places and talk to different people and interact with them is really important.
Yeah, and I guess with, as I said, so I put a pause on my previous career to now come and work with a charity, the Farming Community Network, and that really encompasses a lot of what you've just said. So the focus of that charity is to make sure that we are working with those in rural communities. We've got a helpline that people can reach out to and call, and that's run by a lot of volunteers that live rurally. And so people can pick up the phone and speak to somebody like-minded that just gets it and gets those problems. My particular role is a project with Macmillan, because what the research shows is that if you live rurally, you are more likely to get a later stage cancer diagnosis than if you live in an urban area. And that can be for a variety of reasons. Like we said, is it the infrastructure, the getting to a GP rurally, the things that maybe challenge you going to the GP rurally? Maybe it doesn't feel as confidential because you know so-and-so on reception, and you go into the surgery and you see so-and-so as well that you know from down the road. Oh, why are you here? And you may not want to exactly say that in the surgery. So there's lots of those things and challenges that we're looking into as part of this Rural Communities Cancer Project that I'm working on, and looking at how we can upskill farmers and really prioritise themselves on the farm to engage with their health and value themselves as a real asset, to make sure that people do look and reach out when there's a problem. They feel comfortable to pick up the phone, reach out, whether that be that they say they need maybe some mental health support or any sorts of challenges. They know where to go for that support as well. So yeah, that's something that I've been working on as well.
Is it publicised through kind of farming magazines or through local outlets, or like the community cafe, having flyers up there so that people know where they can access that?
Yeah, definitely. So our website has a heap of information on there, loads of good resources, but part of my job, which is why I love the job, is going out to places and speaking to people and farmers. And like you said about living rurally and working rurally, you can become quite insular. So I love going out to the events because that's me going out and chatting to people, seeing people, and it works both ways. I get interaction for the day, but I know I've interacted with a lot of people as well that will have found that really valuable wherever they've gone out to and come and seen us. So yeah, that's all our Nip It in the Bud campaign that is encouraging people to look out for signs and symptoms of cancer.
That's a great name. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
I can't help but notice that without the other two idiots, we have managed to deliver a tight podcast that doesn't ramble and actually stays on topic. And I want everybody to pay attention to that fact next time you come to download this podcast and discover it's an hour and 48 or something ridiculous. The reason for it always overrunning massively is, well, they're not here, basically, those reasons. So thank you all so much for coming along, and I've really enjoyed this episode. We had a tradition for a while where Mr. Negus would finish the podcast with a rant about something. And I think it might be a good idea if Claire just, if you could really unleash about why Richard is the way he is and why he's so infuriating.
Just your latest gripes with him,
Just
mate.
the latest. What's the latest thing he's done that's annoying you?
Oh, where do you start? Jeez. He's a pleasure to live with. Honestly, he is entertainment value.
Apart from,
he can talk. A lot of what he says is very interesting, but then there's a hell of a lot that is like. One friend described it to me when they met him. They said it's like having the radio on in the background. You know, he's always there. You sort of like you tune out and then you come back in again. You know, sort of, and he's still talking. But no, bless him. That's very unkind.
no, it's perfect. We're having that. Thank you. Right. So I think that's probably us coming to an
You're gonna
end.
kill me.
No, that's fine. It's only immortalised into.